John Meagher, you're joining me just as we were hearing the confirmed, terribly sad news, indeed, that Glen Hansard has died. A motorcycle accident overnight claimed his life just out in West Dublin. So, the shock is still kicking in here. In terms of what's happened, obviously, Garda investigation into what happened. Glen was. Let's just remember from a personal perspective, he was only 56. He was married to the Finnish poet Moira Syriza, and they have a child.
Who's born in 2022.
Yeah, it's a bit barely, not even 4 years old. At this point, and we'll talk about his life, but obviously at the moment, in these days, he was splitting his time between Ireland and Finland. So this will send shockwaves out throughout the music world, right across the globe as well, because he is internationally renowned. Will you take me back to the start, though? Because you know Glen Hansard for very many years from covering your beat back to his early days and your early days in journalism. Just talk to me about Glen's background and how he got into music as such.
Yeah, I mean, he was 56, as you say. He was into music from a very early stage. He was actually busking from the age of 13 on Grafton Street. People will be very familiar with the film Once that John Carney directed. His friend John Carney. And of course, Glen starred in that. And it tells the story essentially of a busker. He knew that world incredibly well. And despite all the extraordinary concert venues that he played over the years, particularly in the wake of the success of Once, he still busked a bit around Christmas, especially. You had a roll call of very well-known musicians coming into the Grafton Street, South King Street area around the Gaiety. People like Bono, Imelda May, various members of the Coronas and so forth would be part of that. He was a very significant figure in music, and would have, I suppose, come to the attention of people in 1991 with the Commitments.
So this is at that point his own music career is taken off, but to a wider kind of mainstream audience, he's outspan,
with that very curly long hair as well. I mean, the Commitments largely weren't professional actors. They were jobbing musicians around Dublin. Alan Parker, the director, for the whole verite idea of a film about musicians, wanted musicians to partake. And his role was comparatively small in that, but it was quite memorable. I mean, it's worth remembering what a big deal the Commitments was in the early 90s. I looked at it again quite recently, and it's like going back in a time machine to a city that has changed beyond recognition. It
captured a mood, though.
It did.
It probably captured a mood as well, though, in terms of Irish creativity, culture, music. We were still a very downtrodden nation. Unemployment was still so high, emigration massive, the troubles in Northern Ireland, the economy was on the absolute floor, and yet on a creative level, U2 were the biggest band in the world. We were starting to find success in film, for example, with the likes of My Left Foot.
The late Brenda Fricker, of course, starring in that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, U2 very much had put the country on the map, something that I guess bands like Thin Lizzy had done in the 70s, but U2, according to Time magazine in 1987, were rock's hottest ticket, the biggest band on the planet. And what happened then is that you've got all these A&R personnel from record companies descending on Dublin, looking for the next U2, and they're signing all manner of bands, some of whom aren't very good or weren't very good. But in the wake of U2, you've got bands like Something Happens and Hothouse Flowers emerging, and then just after that, as the 90s emerge, you've got bands like the Frames, people like Damien Rice, Paddy Casey, Bellex One, I suppose, getting noticed. But the Frames in particular, for me, as somebody who kind of is hitting my is arriving in Dublin in 1993 for college at 18. The Frames are a significant band on the Dublin rock scene. I mean, places like Whelan's and the Frames are so synonymous with each other, and certainly, if you were to kind of go back to that period and to think of a band that might make it globally, the Frames probably were the band that people would have mentioned, because they were great live entity, particularly.
And how big did they become? Did they manage to branch out and break out from Ireland across Europe and the US?
They did to a degree, but not as much as they certainly wanted. And there was an album called Fitzcarraldo, which was named after a celebrated German art house film, and it's very much songs about striving, wanting more, wanting to kind of break free of shackles. And I think it was frustrating for Glen Hansard that he was in a band that were really brilliant live. You know, the critics had mixed views, I have to say. Certainly when I started writing about music in the Indo, there were older colleagues that could be quite sniffy, and one of the reasons was that Glenn never hid his ambition. Just as Bono a decade beforehand absolutely wanted to be a huge band, and I think for a certain generation of critics that was verboten. You know, they liked bands that were privately ambitious, you know, that didn't kind of put that out into the public. And certainly when I first started interviewing Glen Hansard in the very early 2000s, you know, he was somebody that made no bones about wanting his music to find as big an audience as possible, and being very frustrated with the fact that it wasn't happening as much as they would have liked, or as much as they felt that the music maybe deserved. And certainly there were moments where I thought, I find it quite difficult to understand why it hasn't broken through in a really big way in the UK, because, you know, the songs were very well composed. There was the very anthemic. People used to say that a lot of the rock elements of what the Frames did were very Pixies-like, and Pixies were and are very much an adored kind of rock band, alternative rock band. But in this country, they were very significant. And when I think of Dublin in the 1990s, the Frames come front and centre in all of that. I mean, my first girlfriend at the time, who went on to have a glorious career herself in journalism, she was a huge Frames fan, and we spent a great deal of time going to see them in concert. And I've memories of them playing places like the Olympia, where he would kind of put his, you know, health and safety in danger by climbing up into the kind of fancy boxes and singing from in there.
And it was a showman.
Oh, huge showman.
To him. I mean, he was the lead singer, but he was very much the lead personality as well of the band.
Very, very much so. I mean, you've got some kind of frontmen who kind of, they stand stock still. They're wearing sunglasses for the entire thing. But no, for him, it was very much kind of really trying to connect with the audience. And, you know, the cynic would say maybe he was trying a bit too hard to connect with them. But for me, in my early 20s, it felt quite thrilling to see a band that were that visceral and passionate about what they did. And certainly, I think at that stage, they had the songs that worked really well in a room like Whelan's. You know, you had 600 people there, and, you know, as Bruce Shields used to say, you know, a great gig, you should be sending them home sweating.
Yeah,
and my God, they did. Yeah. And not just sweating, but the clothes caked with cigarette smoke as well, because that was the era, of course.
And admired as well by people within the industry. They end up supporting Bob Dylan at one stage, which is quite an accolade.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Dylan had some kind words to say for them, but they you know, they came on the radar of major acts early on, and you know, the likes of U2 gave them a leg up here and there for sure, and certainly that there was a closer bond, I suppose, as the Glen Hansard's own fame spread to America. You know, and I mentioned the kind of the busking that he and Bono would do every Christmas, and I'm sure it'll be quite poignant this year when they busk without him. But there was, you know, there was certainly a sense that some of the bigger names in music were kind of giving them their blessing. And, you know, famously, Eddie Vedder of Pearl Jam developed quite a friendship with Glen Hansard. I mean, both acts, well, I'm thinking specifically of the Swell season here, the duet that Glenn formed with Marketa Erglova. And of course they had huge success with Falling at the Oscars.
Come to that, yeah.
But a fan died at one of their shows, and notoriously 9 fans died at a Pearl Jam show at Roskilde in Denmark. And I think Glen Hansard was very troubled by this, because of course nobody expects something like that to happen at one of your gigs. And Eddie Vedder actually reached out to him, and they ended up kind of working together. But there was a genuine bond and a friendship there. And certainly anybody that I met over the years that would have known Glen Hansard well would have described him as somebody who was very loyal and passionate, and would have felt a strong kinship with him.
Talk to me then about the post Frames era for Glen Hansard, because he achieved, I suppose, a different type of success entirely as a solo artist, and also working in the Swell season with Marketa Erglova. So how did that come about?
He did, and I suppose just for clarity as well, the Frames kind of were still a going concern, and but very much each member was doing their own thing as well. Like Colin McAnumra, the violin player, fabulous player, releasing his own albums. Dave Odlum, one of the first people in the band, is now a very much in demand producer. In fact, I interviewed Sam Smith for a forthcoming issue of Weekend magazine, and he talked about Dave Odlum working on his forthcoming album, and what an important figure he was, or to the making of that album. But certainly things for Glen Hansard changed once the film became such a huge deal. You know, the late actor Heath Ledger raved about it to everybody that he knew in the business, that you've got to go to see this film. I mean, it was a no-budget film. It was made for peanuts, and, you know, that kind of, you know, almost like a fly in the wall type movie, where you've got cheap equipment, and you're kind of almost doing it on the huff in a matter of weeks, and that's what gives it its charm. And it
had an authenticity as a result of that, and
huge
again,
authenticity to it.
Different type of love song to Dublin from the Commitments, both at a more modern life, but still very, very genuine. But the song Falling Slowly, that transcended anything that he achieved with the Frames.
It did, but it's important to remember it began life as a Frames song, but it was re-recorded with Marketa Erglova, and it works so beautifully in the film. And of course the film, its success and the Oscar success that Glen and Marketa enjoyed in the wake of the film, it spawned a very successful stage production, a musical, that played all over the world and made a great deal of money, you know, for the principals involved. And I remember seeing it in Dublin, I don't know, a decade ago, and having seen the movie a number of times, and the stage production, mainly with an English cast actually coming here to play to play Dublin. I mean, there was a certain irony with a posh actor from the southern counties of England playing the Glen Hansard part, essentially a chap who was very much a proud son of Ballymun. But the actor did a great job, and yeah, that moment when the song is played, I mean, it is kind of hairs in the back of the neck stuff. It really is, because it
commands a silence.
It does. Yeah. Oh, it absolutely does. And it did change everything for Glen Hansard. And certainly in the years afterwards, when I interviewed him, there was a greater sense of contentment about that his career was going in the way it wanted to go. But in fairness to him, he didn't change. He was still, as far as I could see as a journalist, still somebody who was very rooted in Dublin and Ireland. And, you know, there were never errors and graces about him. I mean, I think he was always aware that there was a lot of toil, and luck plays a huge part in success. And he had said that to me in an early interview, that never discount the importance of luck. You can have huge talent, or you can have... You can have a lot of things go for you, but you need the breaks.
So there is an irony here, because as you put it, the Frames deserved to be bigger. than they became, and yet it was through once a very low budget movie that he actually achieved stardom on a different level. So I suppose that's how his career was so varied. In more recent years, how was the career development? Because I mean the Frames were back touring only this year.
That's right, and there were some very solid solo albums as well. He was releasing them on a regular basis, and I suppose he was somebody that really was a fine craftsman when it comes to music. And he used to say when I interviewed him that it was all about, and this sounds cliched, but all about the songs, and that you could you're just trying to, as an artist, you're trying to compose great songs, and you're just hoping the inspiration will come. And it did come in many places for him. He also worked again with Markéta Irglova. There were other swell season works. I think he was somebody in his mid-50s who had, I guess, been making music for more than 40 years, essentially, who was in a space where he probably felt fulfilled in that there was a lot of acclaim. He could play these extraordinary concert venues around the world, often to sold out shows, but he was never so famous that he couldn't live his life in a way. I mean, you look at the Bonos of this world. Bono generally has security with him.
Yeah, you can't walk down Grafton Street.
You can't. And I think Glen Hansard kind of could. And I think, certainly in the city of Dublin.
In fact, he would joke himself that after all the success, he'd still walk around Dublin and people would say, how are you outspan?
Exactly,
going back to his days and the commitment. But that was nice. There was a familiarity. You would spot Glen Hansard walking around the streets of Dublin.
You would. And to be honest, as a journalist, I found him very approachable in that he's somebody you could phone up if you were doing a story about such and such a thing. You go, would you say a few words about somebody who has died, for instance? I mean, the awful irony of what we're talking about now. But when I suppose when I think of him and I think back at my earlier years and that young man who was striving for something bigger than himself, and through the power of song, like he was a remarkable frontman. It has to be said.
I saw them playing at the Hot Press 50 concert earlier on this year, and what struck me was very often you see, I wouldn't have seen him since probably Fela days back in the 90s, and what struck me was the voice was still as sharp and powerful and crisp as ever. Very often you see bands 20, 30 years later and you go, Jesus, your man's, the old vocal cords are gone there. The stage presence was still very much there. The booming rock and the voice, it was still commanding.
It was, and I think the key is that he took the craft really seriously. He took the business of playing live, with the seriousness that it deserves. And I don't think that he messed around with his body. Like there weren't stories about him kind of falling out of clubs at 4 a.m. or you've got a lot of people in the industry who just go a bit crazy. It's part of the legend of rock and roll, but they pay the price down the line, where the voice goes or where they're just in a terrible way because addiction has kind of come into their lives. I think with him, he was very aware of the fact that it took years and years and years to attain success. And I'm like, in those early interviews I did, he was still living at home with his parents. Like he was still kind of scrambling for cash. I mean, I remember he had a guitar, particularly the guitar that he played famously at the Oscars, and it was beaten up and battered,
there was always this battered guitar that he had that had a hole
it did
in it,
the body of it,
but he liked the sound. Basically, that was part of it.
He loved the sound of it, but I suppose it's and it
it led to that kind of raw acoustic. It lent to that sense that you were getting a genuine artist playing.
Very much so. It did, but I suppose as well it's redolent to the fact that, Like, he didn't have at the time money to be replacing these instruments. And the other thing is, musicians are often very attached to a particular guitar. Like I asked him about that guitar, and he said, look, most of the songs I'm known for were composed on that guitar at 12 at night, or, you know, I'd be coming in from doing a gig and inspiration would hit, or I'd get out of bed and I'd reach for that guitar and I'd just play an idea on it. So there was that strong connection to it.
Yeah. Just a statement in from ATC Management. With broken hearts, we announced the passing of Glen Hansard, who passed away in the early hours this morning following a road traffic accident in Dublin. Glen's family is deeply shocked and heartbroken by this tragic loss and respectfully requests privacy at this extremely difficult time. The family is grateful for the support they have received and wishes to thank the emergency services who attended the scene, as this matter remains subject of an active guard investigation. Therefore, a comment will be made at this time. So it's just a very formal statement there. No doubt across the day in the coming weeks we'll see lots of tributes. And also it's important because we've been talking about how Glen Hansard was very much grounded in his Ballymun roots. He did have a very strong social conscience, which led to him being involved in various political causes, particularly around homelessness and housing in recent years.
Yeah, the people might remember Apollo House in Dublin, which was one of those awful kind of buildings put up in the 60s. And, you know, it was typical of the vacancy levels that exist, not just in this city, but throughout the country. And, you know, he found it shameful that we still have such a horrendous homeless problem in this country. The numbers are forever going upwards, and that you've got all these, particularly municipal spaces that weren't being used properly. And he was among a band of musicians and other activists who occupied some of those buildings. I think Apollo House was one of them at the time. And I suppose it was to shine a light on, you know, the fact that this is an extremely wealthy country fiscally, like one of the wealthiest in Europe, and yet we have all these social problems that have been inherited from one government to the next, and nobody seems to know what to do about them.
Yeah, and look, the idea, I mean, it wasn't very practical that you would take over the building and run it and service it and so on. But their point was solid, though. Their point was, we have a lot of homelessness in this country. We have a big housing problem, and yet we have lots of money, and we have buildings that could be used to accommodate people. And the Christmas Eve busk was part of that as well, because it was usually the Simon community and Peter McVerry Trust that would make the money from. They would get the money from the busk, literally with them.
Well, absolutely. And look, it's significant where it was as well. So it's just off Grafton Street at the Gaiety, and literally 100 metres from there, you've got a soup kitchen that's run a few nights a week. You go down the street a few hundred metres, you've got Brown Thomas and Weir's, and you've got the huge money on that side and the spending and all the expensive stuff. And then that's a street that is also full of homeless people, and we see it all the time. I walked along there this morning, and again, it's like you've got people begging there. And I think he was very aware of that, and like, you know, he wasn't somebody that wanted to live in an ivory tower when success arrived. I mean, he still felt a very strong connection with downtrodden people, and that was something that, you know, wasn't just a kind of a nice little thing to kind of get behind. I mean, and to be cynical about it, you do have some celebrated artists who discover a conscience later in their career, and they kind of piggyback.
No, it was always there with him.
It genuinely was. Yeah, even when to be honest, even when he didn't have €5 to his name, it was there. In fairness, you know.
And so it brings us to what is Glen Hansard's legacy, because there are many strands to him, literally many strings to his guitar.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, ultimately, I suppose a really, really strong singer-songwriter, a fantastic frontman, a decent actor as well. I mean, the thing is that, like, okay, one could say he's effectively playing himself in Once, but it's still kind of, you still need to be able to act to play yourself. And it's there is certainly a case to be made that he could have made more movies, but I think his great love was performance. He was also a really good collaborator as well. Like, he loved to be in a room, especially if that room was somewhere like Vicar Street or the Olympia, with a whole clatter of musicians. I mean, people like the late Mick Christopher was a collaborator of his for many years, but he kind of, I think so many of these Irish musicians, particularly of that generation, just loved the notion of being able to come together and to be able to just perform songs off the hoof. I mean, we talked there about the stuff in Apollo House. That actually, it was coming up to 10 years since that. And it was a thing called Home Sweet Home. And actually they performed sort of de facto gigs from that venue as well. And it's just refreshed my memory here, the wonders of Google, that Hosier, Codaline and the late Christy Dignam were part of it as well. But he was a significant figure. When we think of some of the people who have died recently, just like Christy Dignam, as I've mentioned, Sinead O'Connor, I mean, he's up there as an important figure. And again, for those of us who kind of came of age in the 90s, particularly in this city, there's something special about the Frames, and that was the first thing I thought about when this shocking news came through. Only a matter of hours ago, is like, God, I remember just that energy he had in places like Whelan's, and yeah, it's desperately sad.
Okay, John Meagher, thanks very much for sharing your own personal reflections on the late Glen Hansard.